The Root of the Penance. Part 1. The Edge of Civilization. Silas Vane didn't believe in God, but he believed in geography. He knew that if you went deep enough into the backcountry on the Kentucky-Tennessee border, the world of men simply ceased to exist. To the cops, he was inmate 402, an old man with lung cancer and a life sentence. But here, among the ancient oaks, he felt like a predator again. He ran the first 3 miles on pure adrenaline. By the 5th mile, his lungs began to burn, a bitter reminder of decades spent in a damp cell. He collapsed against a fallen log to catch his breath, and that's when he heard it for the first time. Silence, but not the peaceful silence of a library. This was a heavy silence, the kind that precedes a tornado, where the air feels thick and pressurized like cooling tar. Part 2. A Foreign Presence. By the evening of the first day, Silas noticed something wrong. These woods lacked the usual symphony of the South. There were no cicadas, whose rhythmic buzzing usually deafens you in these parts, no rustle of squirrels in the dry brush. There was only the rasp of his own labored breathing and the crunch of dead branches under his boots. He stumbled upon a hunter's shack, abandoned so long ago that the roof had surrendered to the elements. Silas decided to hole up there for the night. He built a tiny fire, shielding the embers in the back of the hearth. As the firelight began to dance against the timber walls, he saw them. Faces. Thousands of tiny, distorted faces carved into the logs. They weren't painted, they were part of the wood itself, manifesting as burls and knots. Every single face had its mouth twisted open in a silent scream. Silas chalked it up to exhaustion and hunger, but when he closed his eyes, he felt something brush against his boot. Cold, thin, like a strand of living hair. He bolted upright, kicking the hair away. It was a pale, thread-like root that had pierced through the floorboards. But the root didn't just grow, it writhed, blindly searching for the heat of his skin. Part 3. The Rot Within. On the second day, reality began to fray at the edges. Silas headed north, or so he thought, navigating by the moss. But the moss was everywhere. It carpeted the stones, the trunks, and even the rusted remains of old barbed wire that snaked through the forest. At some point, he felt a strange, nagging itch behind his ears. He thought it was ticks. He reached back to scratch, but his fingers hit something hard. A tiny, sharp wooden splinter was protruding from the base of his skull, right under the skin. Silas screamed. He tried to tear it out, but the pain was blinding, as if he were tugging on his own spinal cord. The splinter wasn't on him, it was growing out of him. Then came the hallucinations. The forest stopped being silent. It began to speak in the voices of the people Silas had murdered 50 years ago. "You left us in the cellar, Silas," whispered the rustle of the leaves. "It was so dark down there, Silas," moaned the wind in the canopy. He ran until his heart began to skip beats, but the woods seemed to rotate around him. Every tree he passed had the same scars, the same twisted limbs. He was running in a perfect circle, even as the compass in his head swore he was moving straight. Part 5. The Becoming. By midnight on the second night, broke into a clearing he recognized from his own nightmares. In the center stood the White Tree, a massive, deathly pale oak with branches that looked like the intertwined limbs of human beings. Silas finally understood why the hounds hadn't caught him. His scent had changed. He no longer smelled of sweat and fear. He smelled of damp earth and bitter sap. His legs grew heavy, literally. Looking down, he saw his toes had shredded through his boots and burrowed deep into the loam. They were lengthening, turning woody, drinking the moisture from the soil. "Please," he croaked, but the voice was no longer human. It was the sound of splitting timber. From the shadows of the tree line, the others emerged, figures that were once men, runaway convicts, lost hikers, hunters. They stood at the edge of the clearing, frozen, buried waist-deep in the earth. Their skin was bark, their hair was lichen, but their eyes remained human. They were wide, wet, and filled with a perpetual, centuries-long wakefulness. Part 6. The Echo. Silas felt his jaw calcify. He could no longer close his mouth. His arms froze in a defensive gesture, hardening into jagged white bows. The last thing he felt was his consciousness stretching thin, merging with the fungal network, reaching miles into the dark earth. He could now feel every worm, every vibration, and the steady, rhythmic footsteps of the search party 3 miles away. He wanted to scream, "Run!" but all that escaped his dry throat was the dry rustle of dead leaves. The searchers would pass by in an hour. They would see just another strange, gnarled tree in a forest famous for its ugly oaks. One of them, a young deputy, would lean against Silas's trunk to take a drink of water. He would never know that in that very moment, Silas Vane could feel the warmth of the man's back and was screaming in absolute, wordless agony inside his wooden shell.